The insult came before we'd even ordered appetizers. "How charming," Victoria Ashworth said, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she studied my mother's dress. "I love that you don't feel the need to keep up with fashion trends. So refreshingly authentic." My mother's smile froze. My father's hand tightened around his water glass. We sat in the most expensive restaurant in the city, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and servers in white gloves. Dominic's family had insisted on this place for our first meeting. My parents had saved for 3 months to buy appropriate clothes for tonight. And Victoria had just torn my mother down with a single sentence. Dominic shifted uncomfortably beside me but said nothing. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my expression perfectly calm. I'd learned long ago that showing emotion was giving power away. "Thank you," I said smoothly. "My mother has always valued substance over appearance." Victoria's smile sharpened. "Of course. How practical." Across the table, Dominic's father Charles cleared his throat. His sister Felicia smirked into her wine glass. And I knew in that moment that this dinner was going to be a disaster. But what they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this possibility for weeks. I watched Victoria's eyes scan the table, cataloging everything about my parents with barely concealed disdain. Their clothes, though new, were from department stores. My father's watch was functional, not luxury. My mother's jewelry was modest and sentimental. Everything about them screamed middle class. Everything about the Ashworths screamed old money and privilege. Except it didn't. Not really. I'd spent my entire adult life studying people, reading body language, identifying authenticity versus performance. And the Ashworths were performing. Victoria's designer dress had loose threads at the hem. Charles's watch was expensive but outdated by 15 years. Felicia's handbag was last season's style, carried like it was brand new. They were trying very hard to look wealthy, which meant they were worried about maintaining that appearance. I filed that observation away and smiled pleasantly as the server brought menus. "My name is Maya Torres. I'm 29 years old, and I'd been engaged to Dominic Ashworth for 3 months. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, our families meeting for the first time, planning our wedding, building connections. Instead, it was becoming a battlefield, and I was very good at battles. People just didn't know it yet. I grew up in a small apartment above my parents' restaurant. My father, Frank Torres, worked as a mechanic during the day and helped my mother run the restaurant at night. My mother, Diane Torres, cooked food that brought people from 3 counties over. We weren't wealthy, but we were happy. I'd put myself through college with scholarships and weekend jobs, earned my master's degree in art history and authentication, built a quiet but respected career as an independent consultant for museums and private collectors. I authenticated paintings, identified forgeries, advised on acquisitions. I made very good money doing it. But I lived modestly, drove a practical car, wore simple clothes, saved aggressively. Dominic knew what I did. But I'd never told him exactly how successful I was. It hadn't seemed important. He was a junior associate at his father's investment firm. Comfortable but not extravagant. Or so he'd said. We'd met at a gallery opening. He'd been charming, intelligent, kind. He'd told me his family was business people. Traditional but nice. He'd lied about that last part. Or maybe he just never noticed how cruel they actually were. 6 months earlier, Dominic had approached me at an exhibition. "That painting is a reproduction," he said confidently, pointing at a piece I'd been studying. "The original is in a private collection in Switzerland." Smiled. "Actually, this is the original. The one in Switzerland is the famous forgery. Authentication was confirmed last year." He'd looked surprised, then impressed. "You really know your art," he'd said. "I should. It's my job." We'd talked for 3 hours that night. About art, about history, about our completely different backgrounds. He'd grown up with country clubs and boarding schools. I'd grown up with community centers and public schools. but he'd seemed fascinated by my world, respectful of how hard I'd worked. My family can be a bit traditional, he'd warned me early on. They care a lot about appearances and connections. That's fine, I'd said. I don't. He'd laughed. That's why I like you. I'd believed he meant it. Looking at him now, silent while his mother insulted mine, I wondered if I'd been wrong. He caught my eye and gave me an apologetic look. But he didn't defend my parents. And that told me everything I needed to know. The warning signs had been there for weeks. The way Dominic had suggested I dress up a bit more when we went to certain restaurants. The way he'd asked if my parents owned anything nicer to wear for the dinner. The way he'd mentioned casually that his mother came from a very old family, and his father managed significant wealth. The way he'd seemed nervous introducing me to his colleagues, like he was worried I'd embarrass him somehow. I'd noticed all of it, but I'd loved him. And I'd believed that love mattered more than these small moments of doubt. Now, watching his mother dissect my parents with surgical precision, I realized I'd been making excuses. Dominic was weak. Not cruel like his family. Just weak. Unable to stand up to them. Unwilling to defend the people he claimed to love. I took a sip of water and made a decision. If this dinner was going to fall apart anyway, I might as well learn everything I could about the family I'd almost married into. Sometimes the best defense is simply letting your opponents reveal themselves. So I smiled politely and waited for them to continue. Victoria ordered for the table without asking what anyone wanted. We'll start with the oysters, she told the server. Then the lobster bisque. For the main course, filet mignon for everyone. My mother was allergic to shellfish. I'd mentioned this to Dominic weeks ago. Actually, I said calmly, my mother can't eat shellfish. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Oh, she can skip that course. The bisque is divine. The bisque has shellfish stock, I said. She's severely allergic. Charles looked annoyed. She can order something else. No need to make a fuss. My father put his arm around my mother, protective and quiet. They were being told they didn't matter. Their needs were inconvenient. I watched my parents shrink a little in their seats, and something cold settled in my chest. Dominic finally spoke. Mom, maybe we should. It's fine, my mother said softly, defeated. I'm not very hungry anyway. She was lying. I could see it in her eyes. She was humiliated, and I was done being polite. Actually, I said, smiling at the server, we'd like to see the full menu. Everyone will order for themselves. Victoria's expression tightened. I've already. I insist, I said pleasantly. As we ordered, I continued studying the Ashworths. Charles mentioned a recent acquisition of a summer home in the Hamptons. But his watch was outdated and his cufflinks were tarnished. Victoria name-dropped several charity boards she served on. But her dress, while designer, was from 3 seasons ago. I knew because I'd authenticated a painting for a designer retrospective and learned to recognize their evolution. Felicia talked about her connections in the art world. But she mispronounced several artists' names and confused 2 major auction houses. They were projecting wealth they might not actually have. Or worse, wealth they were desperately trying to maintain. Red flags everywhere. I made mental notes while appearing to focus on my menu. The server returned with wine, and Charles made a show of tasting it. He nodded approvingly, though I noticed he barely sipped it. So Maya, Victoria said, her tone suggesting she was about to deliver another veiled insult. Dominic mentioned you work with art. Oh, quaint. Like a museum docent. Not quite, I said. I'm an independent authentication consultant. Oh, she said, losing interest immediately. How nice. She had no idea what that actually meant, or how much I earned doing it. Perfect. What the Ashworths didn't know was that I was one of the top authentication experts on the East Coast. I'd identified a stolen Monet 2 years ago. Exposed a forgery ring last year. Authenticated a previously unknown Renaissance piece 6 months ago that sold for $8 million. Museums flew me in for consultations. Private collectors paid me 6 figures for authentication reports. Auction houses kept me on retainer. I'd built a reputation for being brilliant, thorough, and impossible to fool. And I'd done it all quietly, without fanfare or social media presence. I preferred it that way. My work spoke for itself. But it meant people like the Ashworths, who judged worth by appearances and social connections, had no idea who I actually was. They saw a middle-class girl with modest clothes and assumed I was nobody. Their mistake. I took a bite of my salad and let them continue their performance. Charles started talking about his investment portfolio and market predictions. I listened carefully, and I noticed something interesting. His knowledge was surface level. Buzzwords and vague statements. Nothing specific or technically accurate. He was pretending to understand finance better than he did. Another red flag. I glanced at Dominic. He was nodding along, looking proud of his father. He believed it all. Poor Dominic. He had no idea his family was a house of cards. But I was starting to figure it out. During the main course I started asking questions. Innocent questions. Curious questions. Charles, what sector do you focus on in your investments? He fumbled slightly. Oh, we diversify. Can't put all your eggs in one basket. Vague. Non-specific. Victoria, which charity boards do you serve on? She named 3 organizations. I made mental notes to verify later. Felicia, you mentioned art connections. Do you collect? Oh, we have several pieces, she said airily. A Picasso, a Warhol, some others. How wonderful. Which Picasso period? She hesitated. The, blue period. Very valuable. Smiled. She had no idea what she was talking about. My parents watched this exchange quietly. They might not understand the details, but they sensed I was doing something. My mother caught my eye and gave me a tiny nod. She trusted me. Unlike Dominic, who still hadn't defended them once. Filed that away too. Information was power. And I was gathering plenty. After dinner, Charles insisted on showing us photos of their estate. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through pictures of a large house with manicured gardens. This is our main residence, he said proudly. 16 rooms. Historic property. I looked carefully at the photos. The furniture was expensive but outdated. The decor was trying too hard. And something about the photos seemed staged. Beautiful, I said. How long have you owned it? It's been in the family for generations, Victoria said quickly. But Charles said, we acquired it about 8 years ago, at the same time. They looked at each other. Crack in their story. I pretended not to notice. Dominic shifted uncomfortably. He'd caught it too. The point is, Victoria said, recovering smoothly, we come from a certain level of society. Standards matter. Breeding matters. She looked pointedly at my parents. My father's jaw tightened. I'm sure Dominic has explained that our family has expectations, she continued. For how we're represented. For who we associate with. The implication was clear. My parents weren't good enough. I wasn't good enough. We were embarrassments to be managed. Dominic finally spoke up. Mom, that's not. Let her finish, I said calmly. I wanted to hear exactly how far she'd go. Victoria smiled. I'm simply saying that marriage is about more than just 2 people. It's about families coming together. And sometimes families are incompatible. Incompatible how? Yes. Different values. Different standards. Different levels. She didn't say class, but she meant it. My mother stood up abruptly. Excuse me. I need to use the restroom. My father started to rise to go with her, protective as always. I'll go, I said, touching his arm. Stay and finish your coffee, Dad. I followed my mother through the restaurant. In the bathroom, I found her crying quietly at the sink. I'm so sorry, Maya, she said. We're ruining this for you. Your wedding. Your future. You're not ruining anything, I said firmly. They are. But they're right. We don't fit in their world. Maybe Dominic needs someone more. Stop, I said. Mom, listen to me. There is nothing wrong with us. Nothing wrong with you and Dad. Nothing wrong with how we grew up or who we are. She wiped her eyes. But those people out there, said. They're not what they seem. Trust me. I know what I'm looking at. She studied my face. What do you mean? I mean I think they're fake. And I'm going to prove it. When we returned to the table, I made my first strategic move. Victoria, I was admiring the art in your photos, I said. Would you mind if I asked about your collection? Professional curiosity. She preened. Of course. We're quite proud of our pieces. The Warhol you mentioned. Which series? The Campbell's Soup series. Felicia jumped in. Very iconic. Wonderful. Those are silk screens, not paintings. Do you have authentication paperwork? Silence. I ask because the market's flooded with reproductions. As an authentication consultant, I see them constantly. Convincing. But worthless. Charles cleared his throat. Of course we have paperwork. Excellent. I'd love to see it. I recently worked on a Warhol authentication case. Victoria's smile had frozen. You authenticate art? She asked slowly. Among other things. I consult for several major museums. The Metropolitan and the Getty, most recently. I said it casually. But I watched their faces change. The Met. The Getty. Those were institutions that hired the best in the world. Dominic was staring at me. Maya, you never told me. You never asked about my work specifically, I said gently. The first crack in the Ashworth's composure. But Victoria recovered quickly. Well, that's impressive, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Though I'm surprised someone with those credentials would choose to dress so. Simply. Another insult. This time about me directly. My father's face went red. I prefer to let my work speak for itself, I said calmly. I find that people who truly understand quality don't need obvious displays. Direct hit. I just implied they needed obvious displays because they didn't actually understand quality. Victoria's nostrils flared. Our family has never needed to prove anything, she said coldly. Our reputation speaks for itself. Of course, I agreed. Though reputations are interesting things. They're built on substance. And they can be destroyed when that substance turns out to be lacking. Charles stood up suddenly. I think perhaps we should call it an evening. It's getting late. He wanted to end this before I could do more damage. Too late. I'd already planted seeds of doubt. And I wasn't done yet. Before we go, I said, I wanted to mention something. Dominic and I have been talking about our wedding. Everyone froze. We were thinking of keeping it small, intimate. My parents' restaurant has a beautiful private room. Very meaningful to our family. Victoria looked horrified. The wedding will be at the club, of course. I've already spoken to. We haven't decided yet, I said firmly. Dominic looked between me and his mother, torn. Weak. Still weak. That night I did what I did best. Research. I pulled up property records for the Ashworth estate. They were renting it. I checked Victoria's charity boards. She'd resigned from 2-3 years ago. The third had no record of her. I looked into Charles's investment firm. Struggling. Complaints filed. Clients leaving. I verified their art collection through databases I had access to. The Warhol didn't exist in their name. Neither did the Picasso. They were lying about everything. Their wealth, their status, their connections. They were projecting an image they couldn't afford. And they were doing it desperately, which meant they had something to hide. I sat back and thought about what this meant. They'd been cruel to my parents because they needed to feel superior. To convince themselves they belonged at the top. They'd insulted me because they couldn't risk someone seeing through their performance. Dominic had never questioned any of it because he'd grown up believing the facade was real. The question was, what did I do with this information? Expose them, walk away, confront Dominic. Had options, and I was very good at choosing the right one. The next morning Dominic called. "I'm so sorry about last night," he said. "My mother can be difficult." Difficult, I repeated. She insulted my parents repeatedly. She questioned whether we were good enough for your family. I know. I should have said something. Yes, you should have. Silence. Maya, I love you. But my family is important to me. Their approval matters. More than I do. That's not fair. Isn't it? Yes. You sat there and let your mother humiliate my parents. You didn't defend them once. You barely defended me. I was trying not to make things worse, he said weakly. By staying silent you made it worse. You showed me exactly where I stand. That's not Maya, please. Let me make this right. Let me talk to my mother. Don't bother, I said. I'll handle it myself. I hung up and made 3 phone calls. One to a colleague at the Metropolitan Museum. One to a contact at a major auction house. One to a journalist who covered art fraud and financial misconduct. I didn't give them information yet, but I wanted them ready, because I had a feeling the Ashworths were about to make another mistake. And when they did, I'd be prepared. The mistake came 2 days later. Victoria called me directly. "Maya dear, I wanted to apologize for any misunderstanding at dinner," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Waited. "I think perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. I'd like to make it up to you. Why don't you come by the house this weekend? We can have a proper visit. Just us girls." Trap. Obviously. "That sounds lovely," I said. "Wonderful. And Maya, perhaps dress a bit more appropriately this time. You'll want to make a good impression." There it was. Another insult. But I played along. "Of course. I'll see you Saturday." I hung up and smiled. She thought she could intimidate me on her home turf, reinforce her superiority, put me in my place. She had no idea what was coming. Saturday arrived. I dressed carefully. Designer clothes this time. Real ones. The kind that only people who actually knew fashion would recognize as exclusive. I pulled up to the estate in a car I rarely drove. A vintage Mercedes my grandmother had left me. Perfectly maintained. Worth more than I'd ever mentioned to anyone. Victoria's eyes widened slightly when she saw it. First point to me. "What a unique car," she said. "It's a 1965 300 SL, I said. "My grandmother's." She had excellent taste. I walked into the house and began my assessment. The inside of the house confirmed my suspicions. Expensive furniture, but nothing matched. Art on the walls that was obviously reproductions. Books that had never been read, arranged for show. It was a stage set, not a home. "Your home is beautiful," I said. "Thank you. As I mentioned, it's been in the family for generations." He nodded. I'd already confirmed they were renting. Victoria led me to the sitting room. Felicia was there, along with 2 other women I didn't know. "These are my dear friends from the club," Victoria said. "I thought it would be nice for you to meet them, to understand the kind of circles we move in." An audience. This wasn't about making amends. This was about humiliating me in front of her friends. Establishing dominance. "How lovely," I said, sitting down gracefully. For the next 30 minutes, they discussed people I didn't know, places I hadn't been, events I wasn't invited to, making sure I knew I didn't belong. I smiled and sipped my tea. Then one of Victoria's friends mentioned an upcoming charity auction. "Oh, are you attending?" I asked politely. "Of course. We never miss it. The art collection this year is supposed to be extraordinary." "Yes," I said. "I heard they have a Degas sketch. Quite rare." Victoria perked up. "We're considering bidding on it." "Really?" said. "You should be careful. The authentication on that piece has been questioned. I actually advised them against including it in the auction. The room went quiet. You advised them? Felicia asked. Yes. I consult for that auction house regularly. Victoria's face paled. You work with Carmichael Auctions? One of her friends asked. They're one of the most prestigious houses in the country. Among others, I said modestly. I pulled out my phone and showed them my professional website. Credentials, client testimonials, press mentions, photos of me with museum directors, articles about pieces I'd authenticated. The room was silent. Victoria stared at my phone like it was a bomb. You're the Maya Torres, one woman breathed. I read about you in Art News. Guilty, I said with a smile. But Dominic never mentioned. He didn't know the specifics, I said. I prefer to keep my professional and personal lives separate. I looked directly at Victoria. I find that people show their true character when they don't know who you are. When they think you're nobody important. Victoria's teacup rattled. Some people judge based on appearances. Designer clothes, big houses. But in my work I've learned to look deeper. To find what's real versus what's for show. The implications were clear. He knew everything. Victoria stood up abruptly. Ladies, would you excuse us? I need to speak with Maya privately. Her friends left, whispering to each other. As soon as the door closed, Victoria dropped the pretense. What do you want? She asked coldly. Excuse me. Don't play games. You clearly know something. What do you want? Money. To call off the wedding. What? I stood up slowly. I don't want anything, I said. Except for you to understand that you misjudged me. And my parents. Badly. Your parents are nobody. My parents are good people who built a successful business through hard work. They raised a daughter who became one of the top experts in her field. They taught me values and integrity. I stepped closer. You, on the other hand, are renting this house. Your husband's firm is failing. Your art collection doesn't exist. Your charity board positions are fabricated. You're drowning in debt while desperately trying to maintain an image you can't afford. Her face went white. How did you? It's my job to investigate, to verify, to find the truth hidden under layers of deception. You have no proof, she said, but her voice shook. I have property records, financial disclosures, board rosters, auction databases, everything I need. If you expose us, I'm not going to expose you, I said calmly. Because I'm not cruel like you are. She looked confused. But you will leave my parents alone. You will treat them with respect. And you will apologize. And if I don't? Victoria asked. I pulled out my phone and opened an email. Then I send this to 3 journalists who cover financial fraud and art world misconduct. I send it to the board of every organization you claim to be part of. I send it to your husband's clients. I showed her the draft email. Detailed, documented, devastating. Your entire carefully constructed image crumbles overnight. Your husband's business collapses completely. Your social circle learns the truth. Everything you've been desperately protecting disappears. Her hands were shaking. You wouldn't. Try me, I said. I'm the nobody from the middle-class family, remember? I have nothing to lose. You, on the other hand, have everything to lose. I walked toward the door, then turned back. I'm going to give you 24 hours to apologize to my parents. A real apology. In person. And to start treating Dominic like he deserves to make his own choices instead of being controlled by your desperate need for status. Dominic would never believe you, she said. He trusts his family. Does he? Yes. Because I think he's been noticing cracks for a while. He just hasn't wanted to admit it. But when I show him the evidence I've gathered, I let the sentence hang. Victoria sank into her chair. This is blackmail, she whispered. No, this is consequences. Something you're not used to facing. I walked out of that house with my head high. Behind me, their perfect facade was crumbling. And I hadn't even raised my voice. Dominic showed up at my apartment that evening. My mother called, he said. I was upset. What happened? I told him everything. The property records. The fake charity positions. The non-existent art collection. The struggling business. The debt. His face went from disbelief to shock to something like grief. That can't be true, he said. I showed him the documentation. All of it. He sat down heavily on my couch. I grew up thinking we were this important family. That we had this legacy. That we stood for something. Your family stood for maintaining an illusion, I said gently. And they were willing to hurt people to protect it. They hurt you. And your parents. Yes. He looked up at me. I'm so sorry. I should have defended you. I should have seen through them. Yes, I agreed. You should have. Can you forgive me? I sat down beside him. I don't know, I said honestly. You showed me something about yourself that night. When it mattered most, you chose their approval over my dignity. Over my parents' dignity. I was wrong. Being wrong isn't the problem. Being too weak to stand up for what's right is. He flinched. I love you, Maya. I want to marry you. Do you? Or do you love the idea of me? The prestigious job. The impressive credentials. The fact that I'm actually more successful than your family ever was. He didn't answer right away. And that was answer enough. The next day, Victoria and Charles arrived at my parents' restaurant. I told my parents to expect them. Victoria looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Mr. and Mrs. Torres, she said stiffly. I owe you an apology. My father crossed his arms. My mother waited. My behavior at dinner was inexcusable. I made assumptions and judgments that were wrong. I treated you disrespectfully. I'm sorry. It wasn't eloquent, but it was genuine. I also need to apologize to your daughter, she continued, looking at me. You're accomplished and impressive. I failed to see that because I was protecting my own insecurities. There it was. The admission. Why did you lie about everything? My mother asked. Victoria's composure cracked. 8 years ago, my husband's business started failing. We'd built our identity on wealth and status. When we started losing it, we couldn't admit it. We couldn't let people see us as less. So you performed, I said. Yes. We rented instead of owned. We borrowed instead of bought. We lied instead of accepting reality. Charles put his hand on her shoulder. It's been exhausting, he admitted. Living in fear of being exposed. My father studied them. You hurt my wife and daughter because you were afraid of not being important. Yes, Victoria whispered. What happens now? Charles asked me. That depends on you, I said. And on Dominic. Dominic stepped forward. He'd been waiting outside. I told my parents I'm done pretending, he said. Done living according to an image that doesn't exist. Done letting them control my life. He looked at me. I know I hurt you. I know I showed weakness when you needed strength. I don't know if you can forgive that. But I want to try to be better. Better how? Yes. By being honest. About who I am. What I can afford. What I value. By standing up for the people I love instead of hiding behind my family. And if I can't forgive you, he swallowed hard. Then I accept that. But I won't stop trying to become the person I should have been that night. I looked at my parents. My mother gave me a small nod. My father's expression softened slightly. They were leaving the choice to me. I thought about everything. The humiliation. The betrayal. The weakness. But I also thought about the fact that Dominic had been raised in a house of lies. That he'd been taught to value the wrong things. That he'd never had an example of real strength. That didn't excuse his behavior. But it explained it. I need time, I said finally. I need to see if you can actually change. If you can build a life based on truth instead of performance. I will, he promised. And the wedding is postponed, I added. Until I'm sure. He nodded. Whatever you need. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Victoria and Charles downsized. Moved to a smaller house they could afford. Started being honest about their financial situation. It was humbling, but also freeing. Dominic quit his father's firm and got a job at a smaller company based on his own merit. He started showing up for the right reasons. Supporting me without seeking glory. Defending me without hesitation. Slowly, he was becoming someone I could trust. My parents watched all of this carefully. Do you think he's really changed? My mother asked one day. I think he's trying, I said. Whether that's enough remains to be seen. And his parents? They're learning that being authentic is better than being fake. My father smiled. You taught them that. No. I just held up a mirror and made them look at themselves. That takes strength, he said. We're proud of you. I hugged him. Because at the end of the day, that was what mattered. Not impressing wealthy people. Not fighting battles. Being strong enough to stand up for what's right. Smart enough to know your worth. Brave enough to walk away from anything less. The Ashworths had tried to make me feel small. Instead, they'd helped me realize exactly how powerful I was. 6 months later, I stood in my parents' restaurant. Dominic had planned a surprise. Not a grand gesture. Not expensive. Just a simple dinner with both families. A do-over of that first meeting. But this time there was no performance. No pretense. No cruelty. Victoria and my mother talked about recipes. Charles and my father discussed sports. Felicia listened when I talked about work. It wasn't perfect. Old habits surfaced occasionally. But it was real. And real was better than perfect. After dinner, Dominic pulled me aside. I know the wedding is still postponed, he said. But I wanted you to know something. What's that? That night at dinner when I stayed silent. It's the biggest regret of my life. Not because of what happened after. But because I let you down when you needed me. I know, I said. I'm not the same person. I won't promise perfection. But I promise I'll always stand beside you now. I studied his face. And I saw something I hadn't seen before. Real strength. Real growth. Real change. Ask me again in 3 months, I said. Ask you what? If I'm ready to set a wedding date. His face lit up. Really? Really? But we do it my way. Small wedding. At my parents' restaurant. No pretense. I wouldn't want it any other way, he said. And I believed him. Because the day my middle-class parents met my fiancé's wealthy family, everything did fall apart before dessert. But sometimes things need to fall apart so they can be rebuilt the right way. I'd walked into that dinner as someone they underestimated. I'd walked out knowing exactly who I was. They tried to make me feel like I wasn't enough. Instead, they taught me I was more than enough. I didn't need their approval to know it.